Indiana County 911. My brother's gone. Can you be a little more specific, sir? He took my brother. Who took him? I don't know who took him. I don't know what. Sir, take a breath. Explain to me what happened.
And I looked out and there was this big red blinking UFO.
I can just say this. Something's going on in the woods. Something's going on.
They're not dogs. They're not coyotes. What could it be, right?
I had an encounter with a skunk ape, and it completely altered the course of my life.
I found a skull. Are you guys going to want to come build this?
Put him out.
I just see it.
Sightings of a UFO hovering over a barn.
Millie woke up from a dream, and when I went into the bedroom, she said there's a monster on the wall.
They saw that the creature had run through a barbed wire fence. They were able to obtain hairs. They sent the hairs to their lab, and it came back as an unknown creature.
Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin.
What is up, guys, and welcome to the most bizarre show in your ears. I want to mix it up a little bit today. I am the one that they call Shayn Squatch.
And I'm the big bad Boo Daddy Orin Felix.
And you're definitely a big bad Boo Daddy. And like I said, I got to switch it up. I'm going to try to mix up the beginning a little bit each time, so it kind of throws people off, because I came in real hot last week. So this time I had to come in semi-calm as soon as I do the opening part, because you can't say what is up, guys, without getting a little crazy with it. I mean, that's the coming in. You got to set the energy. You got to set the pace for the show, man.
Yeah, you're a little down in the dumps today, but anyway.
So, guys, we have some quick news and updates before we get into the show. Like I said, we're streamlining all this beginning front of the house stuff, but news and update. Orin, why don't you let them know a little bit about what we're going to be changing up and what we're going to be doing next week?
Okay, so as you guys hear us talk about every week, we've got Bizarre Inquiries, which is our most of the time Patreon exclusive.
I like how you word that.
So kind of the premise of that was, listeners and fans and whatnot would submit their own bizarre inquiry that they wanted us to talk about and kind of go back and forth on. So we kind of decided to switch it up just a little bit so we weren't, beholden to people submitting questions for us to talk about. So what we're going to do is still keep the door open for any listener questions, but we're also going to just use this as kind of like a catch-all. So if we want to just, inquire back and forth about current events or stupid shit or whatever, or we want to, come with a funny video clip or a current events video clip, something like that, we can inquire about that. And maybe we'll have guests come on, but it's still going to be a most of the time Patreon exclusive mini show. We're just kind of, broadening the horizons of it a little bit. But you guys be sure to still submit questions and be on the lookout for Bizarre Inquiries coming back next week.
And to throw this one in, for anybody that's been a listener of Inquiries of Our Reality or Bizarre Encounters for a long time, if anybody remembers my old co-host Kyle, we used to do a show called Big Dumb Inquiries, and we had a specific format with that where we bring in clips and everything like that. We will be doing some episodes like that, because I've had a lot of people say that they missed that show, so that will be somewhat of a component that comes back in. So just something I wanted to throw in. Not only questions, if you guys have any clips that you guys think are really, really weird and you guys want us to talk about them and discuss them, you guys can also just send YouTube clips. I mean, even easier than making a question. Just send us a link to a YouTube clip and, we can share it on the show and kind of get into it from there. So just another option. And another thing you guys can do while you guys are doing that is you guys can definitely report your weird encounters to ommencounterreports at outlook.com, or try to make it a little bit simpler for you guys. I know you guys have me on Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff. You guys can send your encounter reports through that also. You don't just specifically have to use the encounter report email. Or you guys can go to the link tree and you guys can use the submission form for that, which will go to my email. I want to do a lot more with those. I want to possibly even kind of do some campfire tale type nights maybe with Orin possibly, where we go live or something like that and we just kind of lay back and have some of you guys pop in, tell your stories, or you tell some of your guys' stories. But I want to get more involved with you guys as a whole, as a community. So at some point I want to be able to do something with those encounter reports that'll be kind of fun for everybody. So if you guys don't mind submitting those, I would greatly appreciate them, because it just kind of opens the horizons for more stuff that we can kind of do as the show, and even bring them into Bizarre Inquiries. I mean, we can definitely discuss them on there too. That's completely another option. So
And if you guys are looking for ways to support the show, you can always leave a review or a rating, 5-star ratings are the best. And
Hopefully.
if you guys leave a review, we'll read it on air.
And if you guys want to support the show in a couple of other ways, you guys can go and check out the Patreon. The Patreon, I recently updated the tiers. There is now a $1 tier, a $3 tier, and a $5 tier. So I actually dropped down the tiers a little bit, but made it so there's bigger benefits for the lower tiers, trying to get more people involved in the Patreon and everything. And there is 7-day free trials available for all 3 of those tiers. And I added also a $20 tier, which is different than the other tiers, because the intention behind that is that it's a sponsor tier. So if anybody is interested in sponsoring the show or, having your product talked about on the show, whatever you happen to do, you guys can go and check out the sponsor tier that I made available. And not only will you get your ads, whatever you want to do on the show, you'll also get full access to the Patreon. So that's also a little extra perk to it. But a little disclaimer I got to throw in. We totally have the right to refuse anybody that we don't want to promote whatever you're trying to promote. And if that is the case and you guys sign up for the Patreon tier, your money will be completely refunded, because I don't want to have any hard feelings with anybody. It's just certain things don't really fit what we necessarily want to talk about on the show. So I just got to throw that one in there. So just because, you join the Patreon doesn't mean we're going to pop it on. Like if you're, just an example, if you were like a girl or something like that that's running like not even necessarily a girl, but anybody that was running like a nail salon in the middle of Arizona, or if you have like a landscaping business that's in the middle of Texas, like that kind of stuff, we're probably not gonna talk about on the show. So just a heads up, because it's just not relevant for podcast advertising. But
damn it, Shane, I was gonna use this to support my OnlyFans.
Well, that's different. That's over the internet. But again, it has to be approved. So, I mean,
you're just dream crushing over there.
But if you open the door to that, bro, it's going to turn into an entire show where you just got to sound like creeps being like, yeah, so this chick's OnlyFans. She's pretty hot. Go and check it out.
Not much of a stretch.
We'll just get to a point where it's just a list of names and be like, oh, so go check out all of our OnlyFans girls. You guys can check out Brandy Ray. You guys can check out Amy Lee. You guys can check out Brandy Joe. Of course, they always got to come in 2-part names. So, and the third way you guys can support the show is through the Open Minds Media merch store. This weekend / it'll already be up by the time this episode comes out. I'm going to be dropping some new designs over there. There's going to be 2 new Sasquatch designs. There's going to be a Dogman design, and there's going to be my Reptilians for America design. I feel like I should definitely drop that one before the election, because it's kind of funny to be like, oh, check it out. I'm not either, but there will be more designs I'm working on, so make sure you guys go and check that out. And if you guys do, Cryptid 10 will get you 10% off. And if you guys go and join the Patreon, you guys will get even bigger merch store discounts. So definitely go and check that out.
And as always, hit us up on social media. Instagram's where we're most active, but also check out the Discord, the TikTok, the YouTube, all that fun stuff. We're on all the internet things, so just get up with us somehow and check us out.
And every single thing that we've mentioned is all available on the Linktree, which is available down in the show description. And hopping into tonight's episode, of course, assumably, because you guys saw last week that it was Freemasons Part 1 and not just the Freemasons, tonight we're going to be hopping back into the Freemasons for Freemasons Part 2, as we talked about a little bit in last week's episode. And, of course, Orin put this one together, so I'm going to have to pass over the microphone and kind of let him start wherever he happens to want to start. So, floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, so, like you said, we did Freemasons Part 1 last week. Just a quick little rundown of that one. We talked about more of kind of the history of the Freemasons. We started off talking about the Knights Templar. We talked about some of like the King of Solomon connections to the Freemasons. Then we talked about kind of their medieval origins and expansion. And we closed out that episode talking about like Freemasonry in America. So as promised, tonight for Part 2, we're going to kind of get into more of the symbolism and ritual associated with the Freemasons. So I think this one's going to be a lot of fun. Should have a lot of good back and forth. So unless you've got anything to add, I will jump right into the notes, Shane.
I'm just excited to get into this one, because now that you got 2 minds looking at it, it'll be like last week with the whole Apple thing. Who knows what you might catch?
Yeah. So, all right. So jumping right in. So as most of you guys probably know, symbolism and ritual play like a huge part in Freemasonry. One of the most common symbols associated with Freemasonry, probably the one that everybody sees on the back of like trucks and stuff driving down the road, is the square and compass logo. And this is often depicted with a capital G. And this capital G is said to represent God or the great architect.
That one single being, right?
Yeah, whichever one you want it to be.
The great architect could literally be anything.
It could. So the square is said to represent, quote, morality, honesty, and fair dealing.
That's funny.
And it's associated with matter. And the compass is supposed to represent, quote, truth and loyalty, and is associated with consciousness. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
I think it's kind of funny that their principles that they rely on, I mean, when you get into like the higher ends of Freemasonry, definitely aren't the case anymore. But the lower ends, they're like, you guys just stay our slaves. You guys are our buffer so that people can't find us.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic, some of this stuff. But anyway, like we said, the square and compass are kind of the most prominent and important symbols. But other tools that were used by medieval stonemasons, they also kind of hold important symbolic meanings. And some of these tools include the 24-inch gauge, which is like a ruler, basically, the gavel, the level, the plumb, and the trowel. And I thought this was kind of interesting and kind of goes back to last week's episode. In Freemason lodges, the gavel that they use for their meetings is sometimes referred to as the Hiram, which is called that in honor of Hiram Abiff, who, as we discussed, was King Solomon's master architect. So there you go, more kind of King Solomon imagery coming up already.
Just to throw this in for the dumbasses like me, what the hell is a plump and a trowel?
A trowel is basically like a little shovel. I think it's kind of like what they use to spread concrete between blocks, technically.
Gotcha.
And a plumb, I believe, it's sort of like a level, but
it has a B at the end, just so everybody knows. It's not plumb, it's like PLUMB. But it's,
and I think it's like a string with a weight on the bottom of
one
it.
of those things for doing everything leveled, like the old leveling tools.
Exactly.
Okay, well, learn something new every day. I knew what both those things were. I just didn't know what the technical name for one was. So
so we're teaching y'all about construction tonight too. But anyway, so the gavel that is called a Hiram in honor of Hiram Abiff, they say that they refer to it as that because, quote, it governs the craft and keeps order in the lodge as Hiram did in King Solomon's temple. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I've been fascinated with that word the past week. It's really fun to say. So randomly, I just got to shout, Hiram Abiff.
Hiram Abiff.
Hiram Abiff. You got to do it in an accent, man. It makes it that much more fun.
It's like Jacques de Molay.
Jacques de Molay. You just got to be in a silent room, working with a bunch of other people, and you just got to hit them with the Hiram Abiff. They'll be like, what the fuck?
King Solomon's master architect, man.
That's what you hit them with, and then you're just going to hit you again with the what? What the fuck?
Just don't worry about it.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
So anyway, kind of moving on. Everybody basically knows about like the degrees and the initiation rituals and whatnot that are associated with Freemasonry. Everybody knows that these are like some of the core tenets of Freemasonry. The use of levels or degrees, as they're called, they each have their own elaborate and kind of secretive initiation rituals. And the original Masonic initiation system consisted of only 3. There we go again with the drinking game. 3 degrees. And those 3 degrees were entered apprentice, fellowcraft, and master mason. And Freemasonry that ends after those first 3 degrees is known as Blue Lodge Freemasonry. And this is kind of, like we talked about a little bit last week, the large percentage of Freemasons fall under this. These are your small town lodges, your Uncle Johnny who's drinking beer at the Masons Lodge.
You can just call them the buffers. They're the buffers.
He's in Blue Lodge Freemasonry. However, once an individual has achieved Master Mason status, he is then eligible to join the York Rite, which consists of 9
ding, ding, ding
additional degrees. And then after those 9 degrees, there is the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. And that goes all the way up to the 33rd degree, which everybody's heard about, 33rd degree Freemasons. But the 33rd degree is actually an honorary position. So like once you get to 32, like it's not like you do this next step and then, you become a 33rd degree. Like they basically have to assign you the 33rd degree.
So getting into like the weird conspiratorial side of all this shit, I just had to throw this in here because it's probably a perfect part. I don't know if you actually, do you dive into like the whole like reptilian conspiracy thing at all?
Not too much. Again, I kind of wanted to keep these as factual as possible.
Well, I'm going to hit everybody with a wild card because why the hell not? You got to hit them with a wild card here and there. So, according to like the reptilian whole conspiracy, 33 degrees consist for humans, but there's supposedly another 33 degrees up from there if you're a reptilian. So I just want to throw it in there. I don't know what the truth is to that. I don't know who fucking dropped that on the internet. I don't know if it's legitimate or not. If you believe in reptilians, maybe, but supposedly if you're a reptilian, there's another extra 33 degrees past the 33rd.
That takes you up to 66. That's kind of interesting.
Unless you're looking at it. Yeah, I guess that's one way of looking at it. Or you can almost look at it as like the level plane and then you go back up to another 33. So it's like a positive and a negative 33 almost. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, if they can put 3s and 6s and 9s and all sorts of symbolism into this, they're going to do it. So definitely possible. So as we previously said, initiation into each of the degrees has like its own specific ritual. And most of the information I could find was only about like the initial 3 degrees. It gets more secretive after that.
It might be in that little black book if we can decode it.
It might be. We're going to get there. But anyway, so during initiation into the first degree, which again was known as entered apprentice, quote, the initiation begins when the hoodwinked, which is a blindfolded initiate, so begins when the hoodwinked and specifically dressed candidate is brought before the entrance to the inner part of the temple, and a guard hits the door with his sword hilt. After questions as to his eligibility and whether his motives are worthy, and a short prayer, he is led 3 times around the meeting room, pausing on each lap to be introduced as, quote, a poor candidate in a state of darkness.
You know what's really funny is that when I had New York Patriot on the show a long time ago, and he was part of the OTO, he said that basically the same thing for this entry ritual, except you were naked for it. And I thought that was going to get thrown in with this part, because, yeah, he mentioned the fact that you were naked for this part of it when you're joining the OTO.
We know that Crowley,
sex magic,
the driving force behind the OTO, and he was a 33rd degree Freemason. So
he had to include the sex magic in there. That's what it is. Because he just said there's a lot of like being in a dark room and being naked with other men. He said it was really, really weird being part of the OTO, which again kind of fits with the whole weird sex magic aspect of Aleister Crowley. Because if you have a club that's just all guys and you're doing sex magic, like, I mean, you put 2 and 2 together there. You're either all jacking off in a circle together. Like, I doubt they're doing this stuff individually.
I mean, they're doing some Jack Parsons shit. They're doing rituals.
Hey, man, if you have 3 in a circle and it all hits in the middle, what happens? Does it open a portal? Maybe.
I mean, possibly.
Somebody who's been part of a circle jerk might have to answer that question for us.
Moving on. So he, meaning the initiate, is then brought before the worshipful master's pedestal. And the worshipful master, like we said, he's kind of the leader of the lodge. And when he's brought before the pedestal, he is asked, what is the predominant wish of your heart? And the answer is light. And so that's whispered into the initiate's ear, and the blindfold is removed. And at this point, the 3 lights, which are a volume of sacred law, such as the Bible, the square and the compass, are then revealed, followed by an explanation of the secret signs, grips, and password of the first degree and the meaning of Boaz, which is the left-hand pillar of King Solomon's temple, which we talked about last week. It ends with the presentation of a Masonic apron to the initiated candidate. So that was kind of long-winded, but I wanted to use a direct quote. Again, a lot of this information comes from this book I got. It's very pro-Mason, so I thought it would be like a good resource for finding out, some of the symbolism and initiation information straight from the horse's mouth, pretty much. But as I kind of teased last week, if you know what to look for, there's some little nuggets to dig deeper into in this stuff. And one of these I thought that was kind of interesting was this, what is the predominant wish of your heart? The answer is light. I thought this is interesting in light of the fact, no pun intended, that Lucifer is sometimes referred to as the bringer of light.
What is the Lucifer, star of the morning, something like that?
We're going to talk more about that in a second. Yeah. Yeah. So just keep that in mind.
I was hoping that you wouldn't skip over because you had in parentheses and you sounded like you were done with that paragraph. I was like, please don't leave this next line out.
No, we're going to hit all this stuff. So during initiation into the second degree, which is fellowcraft, quote, the candidate is admitted to the temple just as he was during his first degree initiation, following which he has to recite answers to a number of questions that he has memorized. Among other things, these introduce him to, quote, the hidden mysteries of science and nature. I thought that was kind of cool, which he is now expected to study. He is again led around the temple. New signs and passwords are explained, and he learns the meaning of Yakin, which is the right-hand pillar of King Solomon's temple.
So, is there anything that says the meanings of either of these that you have in your research, or is that some like secret information?
No, that seems to be something that they kind of keep close to the chest.
I'm going to go ask New York Patriot about it. I'm literally going to text him right now, just so that, because I'm curious, because I'll see if he can throw it back in before the end of the show.
Ask him what the BJ columns mean.
I will. I'll refer to it just like that.
All right. So while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and jump back into the third degree initiations. So this is for initiation into the Master Mason degree. And quote, the candidate enters the temple, which is in pitch darkness. So this is kind of getting into what you were talking about earlier. After a prayer and a ceremony that resembles the first two degrees, the worshipful master and his fellow Masons act out the story of Hiram Abiff, with the initiate playing the part of Hiram and his fellow Masons, his murderers. So we talked about this a little bit in part one. I'm not going to get into it too much just for time, but go back and listen to part one if you haven't, just for a little refresher on this Hiram Abiff murder story. So moving on. It is the worshipful master who eventually raises the candidate to his feet, after which the initiate kneels before the altar and, resting his hands on the three lights, takes the master's oath. So the initiation into the third degree also features like coffin and skull imagery. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more toward the end of the episode. But the coffin and the skull are said to represent immortality of the soul and, quote, act as symbols during the ritual reenactment of the murder of Hiram Abiff.
Hiram Abiff? Sorry.
Hiram Abiff.
Couldn't help myself.
And there's this book called Masonry and its Symbols in the Light of Thinking and Destiny. And it's by a gentleman named Harold Waldwin Percival, which is a great name. And he says, quote, the process starts with an introduction by the master of the lodge. Then the initiate's gaze is directed down in the darkness to an open grave. Inside is a human skull resting on a crossed pair of thigh bones.
Skull and bones?
Exactly. And we're going to probably talk about the skull and bones in a future episode. But this part of the ritual ends with the candidate, or when the candidate, is told that, quote, even in this perishable frame, there resides a vital and immovable principle, which inspires a holy confidence that the Lord of life will enable us to trample the King of terrors beneath our feet and lift our eyes to that bright morning star.
Boom, there it is.
Whose rising brings peace and tranquility to the faithful and obedient of the human race. So this is what I was saying. Like, they want to, have their Freemason Bible, and everything's great.
I almost want to take the time with the Freemason Bible to read through it to see if it almost changes it where Lucifer isn't the bad guy in that version of the Bible. Like they purposely will change some wording.
The Gnosticism view of things is where, like the Christian point of view is kind of switched. And, this whole morning star thing, like we talked about, Lucifer is also referred to as the morning star. And the planet Venus is known as the morning star. And this is kind of interesting because, we've talked about like the whole like peaceful space brothers idea in like early contactee cases. These things always say they come, or a lot of times rather, say they come from the planet Venus, which gets back to, aliens, demons, fallen angels. We're probably all talking about the same thing there.
I mean, I don't know, at least from like the biblical perspective, knowing that this dude hates humans, it's kind of weird that that's like what they picked up on. But again, I mean, you can definitely tell two different sides of a story and have two different results, I guess. You know, I'm kind of curious now. I kind of like, I know it's like a whole thing to like read the Bible, but I'm like gonna look for like key points.
Two Bibles basically at that point and compare them.
I'm gonna have to look for like key points that I'll know like makes Lucifer look like the bad guy, and see if the Freemason Bible like switches it up a little bit.
Honestly, you could probably just read like the first few chapters of Genesis and you'd be fine at that point.
That is true. I'm gonna try that actually.
Yeah, there you go. Since you don't have enough on your plate, let's add that project.
Yeah, because I mean, why not? I have a lot of things that I say I'm going to do, but it doesn't mean that I'm always going to do them. But I'm going to keep them in my mind, and maybe I'll get around to them eventually. But
hey, they're all great ideas in theory. Speaking of great ideas in theory, we're going to move on to the all-seeing eye. So besides,
I had one of those. Sorry, I knew I had one.
What's that?
Oh, you can't hear it because I have the sound effect on. I have a button for the boonts.
Yeah, I knew you used to.
I got to turn off the. I didn't do it before we started. Musician sound. Then you might be able to hear it. Okay. All right, let's try it.
There we go.
There it is.
This is riveting radio for the listeners here.
I'm gonna leave it in because why not?
All right, moving on. The all-seeing eye. So beside the square and compass, probably one of the symbols that most people associate with Freemasonry is the all-seeing eye, and it's also known as the Eye of Providence.
Look on the back of your dollar bills, everybody.
Exactly. So the all-seeing eye is often represented as an eyeball surrounded by rays of light, and a lot of times it's enclosed in a triangle. And allegedly, I think that's our first allegedly of this episode.
Again, I had to take the opportunity, but now we got another one. We got Hiram Habif, and we got allegedly, at least for this episode.
So it allegedly serves as a reminder to Masons that the great architect of the universe always observes their deeds. And the origin of this symbol can be traced back to the Eye of Horus, which was considered a symbol of power and protection in ancient Egypt. And in Egyptian mythology, Horus was, quote, a god in the form of a falcon, whose right eye was the sun or morning star, representing power and quintessence. And I had to look that word up. Quintessence is defined by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary as, quote, the fifth and highest element in ancient and medieval philosophy that permeates all nature and is the substance composing the celestial bodies.
I got to throw this in here because I don't know if you have it in your notes, but I also find this absolutely fascinating. You'll get it in a second. So the symbols for a lot of the Egyptian gods, they actually believe are actually components of the brain. And the Eye of Horus, if you like spin it and put it in the right place, they say that it represents the pineal gland. So
I've heard that.
Just knowing Freemasonry, the whole pineal gland thing and expanding consciousness, like also kind of fits with that if you look at it from that aspect.
And this Horus connection with the morning star and, you know, enlightenment and knowledge and all that, it makes sense.
Exactly. So it's like there's so many layers of symbolism, you don't know which angle to go down because you could like go on for hours just off of one simple component of the symbolism here.
Well, and what's kind of tricky about it too is, like you said, there's so many layers to it. You don't know if, you know, everything is connected or nothing's connected and you're just making shit up.
But I think they do that purposefully because that's misdirection. At the end of the day, that's what the Freemasons are doing. It's the sleight of hand, misdirection.
Yep. All right, so jumping back in, the Eye of Horus is also associated with the Egyptian sun god Ra, and we're going to talk about sun worship and stuff like that more in a little bit. And like you said, the all-seeing eye is probably most notable to people for being featured on the reverse side of the Great Seal of the United States. In this situation, the seal depicts the all-seeing eye floating above an unfinished pyramid with 13 steps. You know, they say it's for the 13 colonies, but, you know, 13 is another number that shows up in Freemasonry and occult circles a lot.
Have you heard the whole weird story with like the dark hooded person that came in when they're signing the Declaration of Independence and stuff?
I don't think so.
So supposedly there's this story that when they're all going to go sign the Declaration of Independence, they're all like kind of worried about signing it first because essentially you're like signing your life away because they're going to come for you at that point. There's supposedly this dark hooded figure that came in and basically told them, one, the turkey, don't do that. Your symbol for your country needs to be an eagle. And two, he pretty much got them all sparked up, got them all excited, got everybody excited to sign the Declaration of Independence. You know, John Hancock came up and he was like, fuck it, and he signed his name big. And then supposedly they all turned around and this dark hooded figure was gone. So I've heard this in multiple places, so I don't think it was just made up in one place. And I believe that the last time I heard it, they claimed that it was a journal entry in Benjamin Franklin's journal. And everybody knows how much weird shit is actually in his journal entries if you actually start to dig into them. So I don't put it out of my mind that he probably wrote that at some point. So,
well, I didn't get into this too far in the notes, but that's interesting to me. The whole thing about use the eagle, not the turkey. And don't quote me on any of this, but the eagle was the symbol of like Mercury or Hermes or one of those gods. Mercury and Hermes are kind of interchangeable. But that was the symbol of one of these gods that is very revered in Freemasonry. So that's kind of interesting.
Even on the other side, though, like just animal wise, think about how close an eagle really is to like a falcon, like for horse and everything too. So it seems like it all kind of fits in the same category. And again, we could just be completely making stuff up at this point, but it seems like
the pieces fit enough that there's probably something there.
Yeah, like you want to hide it but not make it too obvious. So you pick a bird that's extremely similar to your symbol because it's like you want to hide your symbology within it but not make it too obvious. So if you're already using the all-seeing eye and you start putting the falcon, people are going to start putting 2 to 2 together because obviously nobody wanted the Freemasons around because there's the whole push out of the Freemasons and everything. So it's like you can still hide your symbology, but like a step off of your symbology because falcons and eagles are pretty fucking closely related. I mean,
yeah, but like we said, they're not even going a step off. Like the eagle was straight up the symbol for like these deities that these guys worship, if you want to get down to it. So, I mean, there's just several layers to all this. And I mean,
talk about weird for an eagle too. They also go through a rebirth process where when they get to a certain age, their feathers will get too heavy and their beak will start to curl up and like their claws will start to get messed up. So they supposedly go through this stage where they basically will like rip all of their feathers out individually so that they can grow new feathers in, and they'll actually break their beak off on a rock so it can regrow because they'll get to a point where they're not able to eat anymore and they have to go through this rebirth process. Otherwise they basically will die because they won't be able to fend for themselves anymore. So also kind of weird with the symbology, knowing that an eagle goes through a rebirth process, which seems to be obviously a common idea in Freemasonry.
Well, and occultism as a whole.
And I mean, even the history of the country. I mean, you were an English colony and then you're rebirthing into a new country. Like it seems very fitting symbolically with that too. I mean,
yeah, no, that's pretty good. So kind of jumping back into the seal. Below the pyramid on the seal is a banner that has the phrase in Latin that translates to a new order for the ages. And of course, everybody points to this whenever they talk about like Freemason, Illuminati connection.
New World Order.
Yeah, it's right there.
Remember when that was a conspiracy theory and now you have all these politicians that regularly use the term New World Order? Like,
yeah, right there on our dollar bills.
Not even on that. Like, how many speeches are they talking about the New World Order? It's what we need. Usher it in.
Yeah, that would be great. So,
I guess you got to own the word at a certain point, right?
They need to trademark it or patent it, or so. I'm surprised they haven't done that.
They're going to come out and the symbol is just going to be an all-seeing eye with an eye, and it's going to say New World Order around it. They're going to be like, you know what? You guys made the symbol for us, so we're just going to use it now.
Or like the all-seeing eye, like Mac, like iPhone. That's what they're going to do.
Because we're watching you from every single electronic device you have.
Yeah, it's the mark of the beast. Go and get your all-seeing eye.
Dude, talk about
Apple
weird symbology too. Apple as a whole, right? Why is its symbol an apple with a bite out of it?
Knowledge
and temptation, right? Like, there's Freemason symbols within iPhone as a whole. Like, what?
No, you just been on fire with your Apple symbology these past 2 episodes.
It's fucking everywhere, man.
Which the funny thing about that is, like, the Bible doesn't actually say it was an apple, but like everybody's just kind of decided it was.
They just called it the forbidden fruit.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know, maybe you can see other stuff as a forbidden fruit, but realistically, if you think about it, apple seeds have cyanide in them, so maybe it was something that was never necessarily intended to be eaten by humans, but we kind of learned that you don't eat the core, you're fine.
I don't know. So anyway, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but we're going to jump heavy into the Egyptian influence and symbolism, and we're going to talk about an individual / deity / thing person called Hermes Trismegistus. So that's a fun one to roll around in your mouth too.
Megiscus.
So this Egyptian influence on masonry, it goes way beyond just like the Eye of Horus and the all-seeing eye. The Egyptian god Osiris and his wife Isis are important to Freemasonry. And Osiris is the god of fertility, the afterlife, and resurrection. And Isis was considered, quote, the divine mother of the pharaoh, and she was said to help the dead enter the afterlife. So I think you had something to throw in here.
Yeah, not to side tangent, but the whole, like, why is it an apple? Why do people think that? So I just looked it up because I wanted to throw in an explanation because I've always been curious. And it says, rather than a broad general term for fruit, it took on a narrower meaning, apple. Once the change in meaning became widely accepted, readers of the old French version of Genesis understood the statement, Adam and Eve ate a palm, to mean Adam and Eve ate an apple. So that's where it came from, was just transitioning between languages, realistically. So it may not have been the actual words, it may have been at some point, but it just was miscommunication through languages that people just started using it as an apple, because the French version of Genesis said that they ate a palm, which translates to apple.
Symbolism that people have latched onto.
Exactly. So that just, if anybody was curious, I just want to throw that little tidbit of information in.
Okay, so jumping back in, the 31st degree of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, which was kind of devised by this noted Mason named Albert Pike, and we could do a whole episode just about this guy. He's wild. Like, he supposedly predicted 3 world wars would occur, and he did this like before the First World War, and he basically pegged exactly the first 2. And he said that the third one would be through Middle Eastern powers. So that gets into a lot of current events that we're not going to get into here. But
well, he said wild. Through religious conflict in the middle, starting in the Middle East, which kind of weird where we're at right now with everything over there. So I just want to throw that one in there. Tom from Strange Brew, he covered him at one point, going through all of his different ideas of the future and everything. And yeah, that was what they came to as, I don't remember all the details, but the basic of it was just a religious war starting in the Middle East and spreading out that would usher in basically unity where everybody would unite under one religion after that. So
yeah. And so, like we said, I mean, this topic has so many different tentacles. I mean, we could do a whole episode about each one. So I'm trying to streamline it as much as possible. But yeah, you guys definitely look up Albert Pike. There's some crazy stuff there.
Maybe we'll do an Avengers series about him at some point, down the road.
Pike also is supposedly a power name. Kind of funny.
And it's also an asshole fish that likes to steal lures because they got teeth.
I cannot confirm nor deny, so we're going to move on.
I can confirm.
So this 31st degree of Scottish Rite Masonry is supposedly based on the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which was allegedly an ancient Egyptian book that contained mortuary spells and included references to the murder and resurrection of Osiris. And this kind of mirrors the kind of Hiram Abiff story. And moving on, kind of Egyptian symbols like pyramids and obelisks and sphinxes are like prominent decorations in pretty much every Masonic lodge. And even like the apron that they give people when they're initiated into the first degree, that stems back from Egyptian symbolism.
I mean, even going into the eye with the triangle, I mean, more often than not, you can look at it 2 ways. Either one, they do the bricklaying behind because they were the Masons at one point, or 2, it could also be reminiscent of a pyramid itself.
Exactly.
So it still can go either way, but it could be Egyptian symbolism just even in that symbol.
Well, yeah, I mean, triangles are used a lot in Freemasonry symbolism, and that could be pyramids. It's 3. I mean, there's a lot of different interpretations for that, but yeah, absolutely.
And it also, just to throw this in here, because I find it also interesting, they say that triangles are supposed to be like the strongest shape. Like when you're building something, you want to build it as a triangle because it has the least chance of falling over. So it's supposed to be the strongest shape to build in. So again, just another kind of weird idea behind that they're picking the strongest shape.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So we're going to kind of jump forward a little bit here. This section I find really interesting. We're going to talk about another important figure in Freemasonry, and this is Hermes Trismegistus. And Trismegistus supposedly means the thrice great, so it'd be Hermes the thrice great. And the legend of Hermes Trismegistus originated supposedly in Egypt in the 3rd century. And it's kind of confusing, but he's kind of regarded as like a combination of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. But he's kind of considered to be like the final earthly incarnation of Hermes. So there's like the Greek god Hermes, and then there's this separate figure that's Hermes Trismegistus. And the best way I can kind of explain it, not trying to sound sacrilegious or anything, it's almost like a God and Jesus type situation. Like there's God the Father, God the Son. These are two different figures, but they're kind of the same and kind of connected, if that makes any sense.
I want to throw this in here too, that I also kind of find this interesting as far as symbolism goes. So Hermes, if you're looking at it from the Greek aspect, he was like the messenger god. So he was the one that would like talk to the gods. He had the flying shoes, you know, the ones with the wings on the side. He'd go back and talk to the humans and everything and kind of go back and forth. So if you think about it, he's bringing knowledge from the gods, which also fits with the whole Freemason concept.
We're getting, it's literally the next sentence.
Yeah, so, I jumped ahead. My bad, bro.
So he was considered the bringer of wisdom, which again, that gets back to bringer of light, that sort of thing. A messenger of the gods and the keeper of mysteries also.
Also weird to think about too. If he's the one that comes down from Mount Olympus, isn't that also weirdly reminiscent of the whole like Lucifer thing? He's not cast down, but he's coming down.
Coming out of a spaceship.
Also true.
If Mount Olympus is like actually a craft or a vessel of some sort.
Mm-hmm. Again, it still fits into the whole like religious aspect of it too, with like the fallen angels idea.
It all fits. Just like we always say, what do you want to call these things? So the alleged teachings of Hermes Trismegistus became known as Hermeticism. And these teachings are attributed with, quote, the fusion of Greek philosophy and Egyptian mystery teachings that also gave rise to alchemy and Gnosticism. So there's a lot to unpack just in that sentence. So basically, all the ideas that they attribute to this figure is pretty much what serves as the basis for all occult knowledge, secret societies, everything from here on out, you know, basically anything after the 3rd century.
You want to talk about some weird stuff about advancement as far as these secret teachings go for the Egyptians too? If you look into like the medicine they had then versus everywhere else around the world, like the Egyptians were by far the closest to actually having medicine correct as far as like how we understand it today. Like, wow, like they were significantly advanced, not only in building, but also in medicine. And it's like, I feel like a lot of people kind of pass over that detail. Like
we're going to talk about something that has to do with medicine here in a second. So let's come back around to that. So anyway, followers of Hermeticism believe that, quote, humanity, descended into the world of matter from a higher realm and could find salvation only by rising above matter. And this is pretty much kind of the same thing that Gnostics believe. And many aspects of Hermeticism were obviously adopted by Gnostics, but Hermeticism, quote, rejected the Gnostic claim that the universe was the evil creation of an evil God. So this is kind of what you were talking about a little bit ago about like switching the biblical narratives and, you know, kind of switching who's the good guy and who's the bad guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like any story, you know, for every hero, there's a villain, but for every villain, that hero is their villain.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So the primary texts of Hermeticism are known as the Corpus Hermeticum. And this is a collection of 15 kind of short essays. And they were attributed to like Hermes Trismegistus, like himself. But it's widely believed that it was actually written by members of this Hermetic school of mystics in Egypt, because there's a lot of debate on whether this Hermes Trismegistus was like an actual person or just kind of an idea that, or a figurehead almost, that all these people kind of put their ideas and thoughts into,
or in some type of being.
Yes,
I want to throw this
they were
in here
tapping
too.
into.
And I know you're probably going to get into the whole medicine aspect, but Hermeticism, all I keep hearing when you say it is medicine in the middle of it, or medicism. Like the wording is there. You know what I mean? Like it's just
there's more connection.
You replace the D with the T, or the T with the D.
Yeah,
but because assumably med comes from Hermeticism, but the sin part, medicine.
Well, and then there's like hermetically sealed thing, you know, like the etymology and the symbology and the numerology and all this, it fucking matters.
It's weird because it's just so preeminent still today, even if the people that are practicing it don't realize it, or maybe they do.
Yes. So this book, it deals with alchemy, astrology, magic, and occult philosophy. And centuries later, it was translated into Italian. And this is kind of what led to this revival of occultism that spread across Europe. And as we mentioned a little bit ago, Hermes Trismegistus is also associated with the Roman god Mercury, who is another important figure in Freemasonry. And Mercury is sometimes linked with, quote, Pythagoras and the supposed Egyptian founding of the craft. So a lot of these Freemasons straight up say or, claim that the roots of Freemasonry go back to Egypt.
There's a lot of people, too, that talk about, like, the throne of Zeus. Zeus supposedly was actually, like, Lucifer. And if you get into the whole fallen angels concept, that they came down and they basically tricked people into thinking that they were the gods. If you're looking at it from the biblical perspective, a lot of people believe that all these Egyptian gods, all the Hindu gods are actually all the fallen angels just masquerading as gods. So it's kind of funny to think that we're looking at this from the Luciferian aspect, and there's a lot of mention to these old world gods. But if you look at it from the modern biblical perspective, they believe that these old world gods were the fallen angels themselves. So,
yeah, and it's just all a vicious cycle because, again, you could just as easily say, these are kind of two warring factions of extraterrestrial. Like it at some point also becomes an issue of language, and you're like, what could these things actually mean in a real world context?
Or if you're looking at everything from the possible organic simulation perspective, you have the being that created the simulation, and all of these creatures, beings, are actually a virus in the system that's maybe trying to make everybody aware that they're in a system. Just kind of a weird thing to think about.
A bringer of knowledge. There you go. Mm-hmm. So I thought this was kind of interesting too. Hermes is also associated with the biblical prophet Enoch. And everybody knows him from like the Book of Enoch, and talks about giants and all that kind of stuff.
The one man that never actually died. He just got brought into God's throne room.
Yeah, and Freemasonry also claims to have like direct links to Enoch, and they say that he, quote, initiated and promoted a craft in which the eternal truths of Freemasonry were revealed through emblems, symbols, mystics, and mysteries. So I don't know. I just thought there was a lot to unpack there as far as like everybody talks about the Enoch, Nephilim, UFO, giants, connections. I mean, there's probably something there.
I mean, maybe something there, but I'm just going to throw this piece of information in here also because I find it interesting. There's a lot of people, I don't know if this is actually written anywhere, but I've heard a lot of people talk about it, about how Enoch supposedly became the angel known as Metatron, and Metatron's supposed to be God's like scribe, the guy who like documents everything. So again, weird with the whole like he'd be the one that has the knowledge of everything.
And the messenger of the gods, kind of?
Exactly.
Yeah. So we're going to shift gears just a little bit now. We're going to talk about sun, moon, and star symbolism in Freemasonry, but as we'll see, this is kind of all connected still. So Freemasonry has allegedly been linked to the practice of sun worship for centuries at this point. And it's been speculated that the compass and the square, which, as we talked about earlier, they say means like honesty and truth and fair dealings.
Yeah,
but
okay.
Some people say that it actually represents ancient pagan sun gods. And obelisks, which we know play an important role in Freemasonry and in Egypt, they're also associated with sun worship. And I thought this was kind of a cool detail. All ceremonies that take place in Masonic lodges are supposed to be performed facing the east, which is the direction of the rising sun.
Just to throw in this piece of information too, because I don't know if you have it in here. So obviously you're talking about obelisks with the sun. So the sun is supposed to represent the masculine, which would make sense that it looks like a phallus. And the moon is supposed to represent femininity, the female side of things. So I just want to throw that piece of information in there, just something interesting to throw in, that if it does represent the sun god, the sun's supposed to represent masculinity, so hence the obelisk looking like a phallus.
Yeah, and it's also referred to as like the phallus of Baal, which I think we mentioned in the first episode.
The whole phallus and ball.
Yeah, not the phallus and ball, like not like D's nuts balls, but Baal the god.
Just add an S at the end, and it's close enough.
And another A. But anyway, so the moon is also kind of important in Freemasonry, and the moon is linked with alchemy as well. And in alchemy, the moon is represented by the element silver. And in the early days of Freemasonry, there are some lodges that held their meetings during the week of the full moon, and these became known as moon lodges. Supposedly, very few of these moon lodges exist today, but Freemasons still believe that the sun and moon together are said to represent wisdom, power, and goodness. So that kind of gets back to what you were just saying as far as like the masculine and feminine aspects. When you combine them, you get wisdom, power, and goodness.
It's duality. It's like polarism. And
as we will see, duality is a big concept in Freemasonry.
I mean, that's literally everything, man. It's all about balance. I mean, even when we get into like the yin and the yang, it all represents masculine, feminine, and the balance in between, which is kind of weird if you think about where society is now, that everything's kind of flip-flopped. So it's kind of like it's creating chaos in order to try to bring back in that duality.
But that's what magic is, isn't it? Order out of chaos.
Exactly. So again, just kind of weird to think about where society is now and the whole idea behind these Freemason elites controlling society and the function of society. So, I mean, maybe it's purposefully because, you create order out of chaos.
Yeah. All right. So this next section, I think, is a banger. I think you're going to enjoy this.
I already see the last little circle and I'm already interested. So,
So one of the most important symbols in Freemasonry is known as the blazing star. And this blazing star symbol is often linked with the planet Venus, which we, just talked about, the whole Morning Star, Lucifer connections, Space Brothers.
I mean, blazing star too, meaning Lucifer getting cast out of the heavens. I mean, also something that seems symbolic with it, and getting into your next sentence, that could also fit.
Perhaps. So they say that this symbol has many different meanings. It's said to represent the sun, so that gets back to the sun worship. The supreme being, which, again, they don't really specify who that is. It could be whatever you think. Divinity and resurrection. So this resurrection motif pops up time and time again. And the blazing star is also linked with the Star of Bethlehem, and that gets back to ideas that, the Star of Bethlehem was actually a UFO that was guiding these people to the Messiah, and that gets back to ideas that, was Jesus's birth and the Immaculate Conception like a alien visitation. So there's a lot to unpack there. I'm not going to get too deep into that. We could talk about that for hours, but
I mean, even if you're looking at it from another biblical perspective, I want to throw in too, a lot of the old Hebrew, Christian, whatever you want to, because it wasn't Christian at the time, of course, kind of goes into a lot of astrology, and astrology is obviously a very like new agey concept where a lot of like modern day Christians don't want to touch that kind of stuff. But I mean, realistically, the three wise men would have had some understanding of mysticism, because if you think about it, they're coming from like towards Egypt, all those type of areas. So it's like, maybe they were a little bit more.
Pretty much say that they were like mystics or something like that.
So essentially, they're using astrology, if you're looking at it from that perspective, and following the stars based on an understanding of astrology, which is demonized in today's Christian culture, but in the past may have actually been part of it because it was a creation of God. And if you used it for the proper means, then it was okay. But if you used it to try to guess the future, do all this kind of stuff, then that's when you get into, the duality of magic, that magic isn't necessarily good or evil. It's
what you do with it.
Yeah, it's the intentions of the user of it. And that's why a lot of this knowledge, I think we were talking about this last week, maybe have been hidden from the humans, is a matter of like, it's there, but they don't want people to know how to use it unless you're going to use it for the intention that they want you to use it for, not evil means.
Yeah.
We have to take a quick second to give a shout out to all of the fantastic sponsors of the show. So without further ado, Orin, why don't you let them know a little bit about some of our sponsor friends?
Big shout out to our buddies Rick and Hans with IKNOWSQUATCH. Check them out for all your squatchy gear needs. Joe at Cryptoteeology. He's always killing it with your wearable cryptid favorites.
I missed that.
Mr. Jones, take it away.
And Snarly Yow for a fantastic natural line of beard oil, beard balm, beard shampoo, and body wash, all with an enticing woodsy aroma of smoky cedar with a hint of mint. But that's not the only thing the Snarly Yow does. Orin, what else does he do?
He also puts on enticing events in the West Virginia area. Our buddy Dave, a.k.a. the Snarly Yow, nicest guy ever. So if you're in the area, check out one of his events. We will be speaking and emceeing at Cryptid Halloween 3 this October.
And we'll, of course, give you guys more information on that as we get closer. And our newest sponsor of the show, I got to give a big shout out to him. And he will also be a guest on the show, I believe, within the next couple weeks. So you guys can hear a little bit about him and his own weird personal stories he's had on his property. But Big Ape Threads, don't forget to go and check that out for all of their Bigfoot and cryptid related designs. And moving into the affiliate links, and you guys can go and check out Oregon-ite, which specializes in scale model pyramid replicas, EMF protection devices, and much more. And if you guys use code OMM at checkout, you guys can receive 10% off.
And a big shout out to our buddy Barry with Dimension Devices. Check out our episode we did with him a couple months ago if you guys haven't. But he makes this super cool ghost hunting device called the Chattergeist. He was nice enough to share one with me and Shane. Super cool device. He's a super cool guy. All the maintenance and updates and whatnot he does himself. So definitely check that out.
And the other, not this show related affiliate link. Oh, sorry, I got to throw this in. And if you guys want to get a Chattergeist for yourself, you guys can use our affiliate link to receive 10% off. And it is all in pounds, but it does convert over through PayPal. So just because you're not in the UK, don't think that you can't scoop one for yourself. And moving into the last affiliate link, if you guys are another podcast or you guys own a local business, anything like that, you might need to be able to print your logo onto stickers, envelopes, t-shirts, any of that really cool stuff, you guys can go and check out Sticker Mule. And if you guys use our affiliate link that will be down in the show description, you guys can receive a $10 credit towards anything you guys might want to pick up. I use it for all of my stuff. They have really, really good quality, so I highly recommend checking out Sticker Mule.
And now let's get back to the show. So while we're talking about star symbolism, we need to discuss the pentagram. And this is another important motif in Freemasonry. And the symbol of the pentagram, heavy metal bands in the 80s didn't invent this. It goes back to ancient times. And in Hermeticism, the pentagram was said to represent, quote, man's relationship with the cosmos, which I think is kind of interesting. And it's also associated with the caduceus, which is Hermes' staff. And everybody knows what this looks like, whether they realize it or not. It's, quote, intertwined by two serpents, sometimes surmounted by wings. So this is the medical symbol.
Yep. I just want to throw this in here, too, talking about inversion of symbols. So if you're looking at it from the pagan perspective, the 5-point star was supposed to represent the 4 elements and spirit or soul. So you take the Freemason concept and you invert things, and that may have been like the positive intention, but you flip it into the negative intention, and it goes back into that magic concept that it's all about the intention of the user, whether you're using it for the positive or using it as the negative side of the 4 elements with spirit, which obviously is a big dealing within Freemasonry anyways, but you want to invert that magic into something different. Because going back into the duality concept,
especially today, people have a very negative connotation of the pentagram, but getting back to the tarot, which we talked about quite a bit in episode 1, there's this idea of pentacles, which is basically the pentagram but flipped right side up, and that's a good symbol. So yeah, exactly what you said. It's a lot of this is interpretation and
inversion and duality.
Yes, exactly. Because the pentagram, was actually considered by Pythagoreans to be, quote, a symbol of health and knowledge. So that gets back to the whole kind of medical aspect of all this. And in medieval times, Freemasons said that the pentagram was a symbol of deep wisdom. And then that gets back to, bringer of light, Garden of Eden type stuff. So these same motifs keep popping up time and time and time again. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. We're talking about the same, 4 or 5 core things with each of these symbols.
Dude, talk about a weird thing to think about too. So if each coin is supposed to represent the 4 elements in soul, right? So you have them divided at the tips, but at the center, you have them all put together into something different. So is that a master understanding of knowledge that is supposed to symbolize that? Because it's supposed to be a combination of knowing and understanding of combining the 4 elements with soul to create something different?
I mean, that would be right in line with everything we've talked about and everything these people believe.
Because at that point, it's like, I feel like there's a reason why there's the cross hatches in the center. Otherwise, it would just be a 5-point star outline. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like it may have been lost through time, but there's got to be an intention for having the lines created in the middle of that, you know?
Well, even if it's as simple as just everything's connected, you know?
Yeah, like I said, they're separate until you have an understanding, and then they become this connected centerpiece.
Yeah. And, like we kind of already said, people have looked at this Freemason use of the pentagram to like further link them with occult activity. But as we've kind of seen, the Freemasons are doing a pretty good job of linking themselves to that by themselves. You just kind of got to know what to look for. Something
else weird to think about with the 5-point star too, the outsides are 5 triangles. And there's a lot of symbolism within triangles. The 5 part's weird.
5, yeah.
But it's still 5 triangles.
Yeah. And so I guess what would the shape, if you take out the triangles, would that be a pentagon that's in the middle?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
To unpack there too.
Yep. See, like I said, I feel like with each symbol, it's not just the symbol represents this. I feel like there's a lot of different components on what builds up for the symbol representing that. It's just...
Yeah, it's like Shrek and his onions. There's so many layers to all this stuff. And that's not a joke. I mean, the deeper you get into this, the more connections you see. So,
and I wonder if that's something that's like still a secret knowledge to the Freemasons, the understanding of why the lines are there, or if that's something that could have possibly just been lost through time because that symbol's existed for so long.
I mean, I feel like with a lot of this stuff we've talked about in this series, somebody knows the quote unquote answers to all this. It's just like the meaning of the BJ columns. Like, they've got a meaning for that. We don't know what that is.
I haven't gotten a response yet from Patriot, but I'm going to keep poking the bear until I get one because I got to know the answer to this. And I only know like 3 people.
BJ means.
I only know like 3 people who claim to have been Freemasons. So if it doesn't work with him, I'm going to hit up the other 2 and try to figure this out.
Hey, we'll have to do a follow-up at some point.
We'll just throw it in the beginning of the next episode if I get an answer. We'll be like, so last week.
All right, so you ready to kind of shift gears a little bit?
Yes, sir.
All right, so you were asking where we're going to talk about this last week, and we're to it. So we're going to talk about the mosaic pavement. And this is kind of this distinctive flooring pattern. It resembles like a black and white checkerboard.
I was going to say, just make it simple. It's a checkerboard floor.
Yeah, it's a checkerboard. And it's said to represent duality or, quote, the 2 sides of everything. And this flooring pattern is basically in every Masonic lodge.
Weird to think about, too, with the whole dark and light thing, because you look at the floor, and depending on how your brain represents it, it's either a white floor with black squares, or it's a black floor with white squares. So duality could go either way, depending on how you look at it.
Whatever way you want to go with it.
Exactly. And it also kind of deciphers the mind, too, because depending on how somebody sees it, might actually subconsciously tell you something about that person, whether they see the light in things or they see the dark in things.
Well, and kind of just bringing all this back home, it's also said to be a representation of the ground floor of King Solomon's temple.
Which in that book that I was telling you, there's pictures of the checkerboard floor in King Solomon's temple.
Yeah. And so this mosaic pavement is considered one of, quote, the 3 ornaments of the Masonic Lodge, and the other 2 are the blazing star, which we already talked about, and something that's called the indented tessel. And I had never heard of this before.
I don't even know what a tessel is.
The indented tessel is the border or, quote, skirt work around the pavement. And it's said to symbolize, quote, those blessings and comforts that surround us and that we hope to obtain by a faithful reliance on divine providence, which is hieroglyphically, that's a hard word to say, represented by the blazing star in its center. And this indented tessel is also said to refer to, quote, the planets in their orbits around the sun, or, quote, the canopy of stars that surround the universe. So, a lot to unpack there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, the picture I think I used for last week, it has some kind of like outline border to it. So I'm curious. I'm going to look that up to see if it's like a common motif that you focus on the checkerboard floor, but maybe there's some intricate patterns that might symbolize other things that they purposely make around the outside of the checkerboard floor.
Yeah, I think like there's a pretty standard, kind of template for this flooring. It's like the checkerboard floor is the main pattern. And then this kind of border or skirt work, as they call it, it's almost like little golden triangles or maybe pyramids, if you will. And then again, there's the blazing star symbolism in the middle is kind of my interpretation of it.
Like the center of the floor or like the center of the outsides?
The center of the floor is my understanding. But again, don't claim to be an expert. Just the pictures I've seen, that's kind of how it's represented. But again, not an expert.
Just to throw this into the picture that I used for last week's episode with the checkerboard floor, in the center of the floor, there is a coffin with a skull and bones on it.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that again in a second.
So I just want to throw that in here. And then, of course, there's the two pillars, and there's the Freemason altar in the background, and another 2 pillars, and another 2 pillars, like they go in layers. But everything always has the 2 pillars.
Yes, the 2 pillars are really important, kind of like all King Solomon imagery is, but the pillars seem to be very, very crucial to the whole Freemason mythology.
Weird thing to think about. So if you really think about how Freemasons started with the Hospitallers, maybe supposedly started with the Hospitallers, and then the other side, why am I brain farting on it?
The Knights Templar?
Yeah, the Knights Templar. I'm almost kind of curious if maybe some of like what it might represent is the fact that it's not that those 2 factions warred and necessarily one of them won, but rather that they came together at a certain point and became one together. So it's like the 2 pillars of how they started, and then they continued on through the center.
Well, what's interesting about that is, for anybody who doesn't remember from the first episode, the Knights Templar wore white tunics, the Hospitallers wore black tunics. And if you look at the pillars as they're depicted on the tarot card, one of them's white and one of them's black.
Misdirection, man. They had everybody warring with each other while the ones that were actually running the organization said, hey, we have a lot of the same beliefs. Let's just go together in the middle and create a new society.
Not to sound too conspiratorial, but doesn't that kind of get back to, I'm not saying I believe, but I believe about our current political system, like there ain't 2 separate teams. It's the illusion of 2 teams and somebody pulling the strings behind that. So.
And honestly, it's not an election, it's a selection. I heard that today, and I was like, that's pretty correct.
Yeah, or in Trump's case, an erection sometimes.
Only when he's at the beauty shows, grabbing him by the you-know-what.
All right, moving on. So we're going to talk about the last kind of topic for tonight. And this was not something I was familiar with until I got digging into all this. Have you ever heard of tracing boards?
I think it's one of those things that, like, I don't know it offhand, but once we start going, I might.
All right. You might want to get your little decoder book out, too. All right. So another important aspect of Masonic ritual is known as tracing boards. And these are, quote, intended to help candidates to master the intricate symbolism that features in the initiation rituals for each of the 3 degrees. And each of the degrees has an individual board. And this is, literally a piece of wood that's painted with emblems and symbols pertaining to each of the respective degrees. And the tracing boards also feature ciphers or keys that are, quote, used to train Masons in the decoding of the secret parts of Masonic ritual. And I have, you're probably not going to be able to see this, but in this book, there's an example of the keys on the tracing boards.
You're going to have to send me a picture of that, because I'm kind of curious if I can maybe use that to try to figure this book out.
Yeah, I'll screenshot it and send it to you after we get done recording.
And if I get any information out of that book, I'll let you guys know.
So the tracing board that's associated with the first degree, quote, sets out the general Western metaphysical scheme and features a symbolic representation of the lodge's interior, and it also shows the mosaic pavement. It's also features a representation of Jacob's ladder, which is, quote, reaching upwards to the blazing star in the heavens, where the sun, moon, and 7 stars are also depicted. And as everybody knows, according to the biblical account, Jacob experienced like this dream where he saw angels descending and ascending from this ladder that was coming down from heaven. And a lot of people interpret that as like an alien UFO abduction type situation.
That's how outdated their technology was back then, but it was new and updated to them. Instead of having ramps like we have with the modern UFO, they just hovered above and threw a ladder down there.
But it could have been a ramp, and like ladder was the best description they had, you know?
That is also true.
Language.
I like to imagine them just having one of those like helicopter drop down ladders coming out of a UFO, though. That sounds a lot more fun.
Those are impossible to climb on. I don't care what Arnold Schwarzenegger says.
They just throw a rope down and they just slide down. They're like, I've descended from the heavens.
Get in the chopper.
Get in the extraterrestrial chopper.
But kind of funny, it's also been said that the concept of Jacob's ladder may have stemmed from Hermeticism. And I don't know how that's possible since it was in the Bible. But anyway, it's something that I came across.
Different perspective and interpretation of the same event. But I think it's one of those things that it's not exactly worded the same, but it's probably there if you really read it and, again, kind of cross the words over from what words they were using to explain things in each region at the time.
Yeah. I mean, same stuff we talk about all the time on the show. But anyway, the tracing board associated with the second degree is, quote, a symbolic representation of the individual in more detail, and it depicts the interior of King Solomon's temple and complete with the BJ pillars. And it also has a staircase that allegedly leads to the Holy of Holies, which we talked about last week. And staircases are kind of another important motif in Freemasonry. And there's this whole thing that I had never heard before that I thought was kind of interesting. Like, Freemasons believed that you should always, when making a staircase or a ladder or anything like that, do an odd number, because odd numbers were considered more perfect than even numbers, which is kind of an odd concept.
Well, if you think about it, you can split it and you have a piece on top. That's probably how they're seeing it.
And, you know, it gets back to something as simple as, you know, it's a stupid superstition, but like when you're making a martini, it's supposed to be bad luck to have an even number of olives. You're supposed to use 1 or 3. So it just got me thinking, you know, has these concepts of Freemasonry extended so broadly across our, you know, our subconscious that something as simple as that still has roots in Freemasonry somewhere?
Something else kind of weird to think about. If you take a staircase, right, and it's an uneven number, if you turn the other side down, it would create a triangle, and that would be the pyramid, because you'd have the steps up with the top.
Well, and there's also this kind of concept that if it has an uneven number of steps, you arrive at the top with the same foot you started at or something like that, which is kind of completion again.
Dude, talk about some weird stuff that may underlie in our culture. Everybody has a staircase in their house. Go count them. See if you have an uneven number of steps, because maybe a Freemason built your house. More than likely, it probably happened.
Well, and I never lived in a house that had steps growing up, but I think it would be funny to kind of take like a survey of people and be like, hey, how many of these have odd versus even? Because, you know, theoretically it should be.
Dude, how many steps usually go into a house? It's either 1 or 3. Think about it. That's so weird. Even the steps going in your house, it's always 1 or 3.
Yeah, pretty crazy. So the tracing board associated with the third degree, quote, alludes to a process by which the individual can realize a richer interior potential, and it features a coffin and skull and crossbones.
Which was exactly what was on the cover for last week.
Yes. So while, quote, the interior of King Solomon's temple is again depicted, this time as a vignette on the coffin, the emblems of mortality and the working tools of a master mason and a craftsman are also displayed. So that gets back to kind of skull and bones connections. And I have a picture here that I'm going to try to show you. I'll have to send you a screenshot of this as well. But here's a picture of the 3 tracing boards for each degree.
Kind of another weird thing to think about. So I had somebody on a long time ago. I don't remember who it was. I think it was Robbie, actually. When we were talking about, it was the episode before the one where we were talking about King Solomon's Temple. We were talking about the whole idea between like talking heads and like communication with the dead. And he brought up the whole idea of the skull and bones and like why they collect the skulls. And from like his research diving back all the way to like the biblical concept of it, he pretty much came to the conclusion that the skull is supposed to be a way to be able to communicate with the dead.
Okay, that's kind of interesting, even when we talk about like the crystal skulls and things of that nature.
And the Freemasons, or well, not Freemasons, but the Skull and Bones collecting the skulls of important figures.
Who are we kidding? The Skull and Bones are basically like the farm system for the Freemasons.
It's the college version because they start off the Skull and Bones in college. It's the predecessor to becoming a Freemason.
Not just any college at Yale.
Yep, but
so
yeah,
no,
communication with the dead.
We're gonna do a whole episode about that. That gets into the bushes and all kinds of craziness. So maybe that'll be the next one I start working on.
And there's even a connection to the Jolly Roger. So just throwing that one out there too.
Yeah. So anyway, that's all I've got for this one.
And it was definitely very well covered. Even trying to just skim through it. I mean, I feel like we covered a lot of the good details, and we can definitely dive into a lot of these concepts a lot farther. But if somebody came in and they've heard the Freemasons and they didn't know much about the background, I feel like this was a really good run over for people to begin to have an understanding of the whole Freemason concept. I don't want to say anything, like, I feel like most people that are Freemasons don't even fully understand the Freemasons, but at least a good introduction to understanding what's actually happening with the Freemasons.
Well, and that's what this was intended to be. I mean, like we said, we could do a 10-part series and barely scratch the surface. And there's just a lot of this information we're not ever going to know because we're not Freemasons and we're not high-level Freemasons. But, this was just intended to kind of give everybody a dipping their toes in the water type situation and just give us a jumping off point for talking about more of this kind of stuff moving forward. Because, I kind of feel like we've covered a lot of the big cryptids at this point. We've covered a lot of, the big UFO encounters. I think it'd be kind of fun to branch out a little bit and start talking about more of this kind of stuff. So, I
mean, it still fits the theme, man, because if you encounter a Freemason, it's definitely a bizarre encounter.
Yeah, all of this is very bizarre. And on that note, and you guys know the drill. If you want to get up with us, do all the internet things. Instagram's where we're most active. Contact us if you want to be a guest on our show or have us as a guest on your show or sponsor the show or collab in some way. Just get up with us.
And if anybody is interested in podcast and or audio book production services, you guys can shoot me a message through Open Minds Media, which of course is available on the link tree, just like every single link that we have mentioned today. And guys, we have fun being weird. I know you guys have fun being weird. We all have fun together diving into all of these weird, bizarre encounters with weird beings and or people, in this case of the Freemasons. So guys, always don't be afraid to stay bizarre. 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 Bizarre.
Trismegistus?